all the things that I could have been, right? If I wanted to be a drug trafficker, like if that was a goal of mine, I could have done that, right? If I wanted to be this or that or this other thing, I could have done it. And yet, the thing that I was the most painful for my family for some reason, even though I don't think that the person that I am has caused nowhere near as much harm as any of all these other things.
Hey, Brats. I'm Robin and I'm trans.
I'm Ben and I'm trans.
And this is Ben and Robin Are Trans.
And today we have a very special guest, one of my dearest, dearest friends who I've known for 12 years now. I looked it up last night. And they are wonderful. And their name is Ari. Um, and, well, I guess I will say, Ari, we always start every episode with a moment of trans joy, and I would love for you to share one. But first, can you let our listeners know about your gender so that they may know how to address you if they are thinking of you in their minds?
Okay, so to start, I'll say, yo, 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 what up, homos? My name is Ari Rosales. I identify as queer transgender person. My self location, let's call it that, in terms of where I feel on the gender map, has changed a little bit over time. I think I definitely identify as a trans feminine person who was socialized as male and had to unpack a lot of those experiences in order to embrace who I was and love myself. And over the years, as I've gotten older, I've sort of come to see myself a little bit more on the agender
Mhm.
spectrum that I feel sometimes feels like, maybe I am just an enigma wrapped in a burrito or tortilla or whatever. I use they them pronouns in English. I use feminine ella pronouns in Spanish. Yeah, I think that covers some of it, right?
Yeah. And then do you have a moment of trans joy that you'd like to share?
Oh, trans joy. Let's do two.
Okay.
I'll be greedy and share two. One recent, one more that is more reminiscent of youth. A couple of years ago, I got the privilege to teach a creative writing class at my local university where I'm an adjunct professor. And so I have always been interested to see queer writing, queer literature that wasn't super polished and already published, and now they're in the world. And I think I was lucky enough that the class was advertised, not necessarily with a center on LGBTQ literature, but I advertised the class with a lot of queer studies sort of folks. So I was teaching this class. I had about 21 students, and I think 19 out of my 21 students turned in stories about queer relationships. And that
Oh,
was the largest amount of queer stories that I had ever seen all at once in the wild, not in some, book that someone chased down the street, people to like put in a book. It
That's
wasn't some
amazing.
artificial thing. It was literally all manifested in a classroom over the course of a term. And I had never felt so rich. I have never felt so just incredibly both like grateful of one, the person I wanted to be when I was young, which is I wanted to be a creative writing teacher, and two, I wanted queer stories to be more widely available. And I, have the privilege of teaching in Portland, Oregon. And so there is an overrepresentation of queer people in my city. There is an overrepresentation of queer people at my university. And this sometimes manifests in this beautiful natural way where entirely out of just like the universe came out all of the stories of every kind, like romance, horror, fantasy, every kind of genre you wanted, any kind of style you thought of. Someone is writing queer literature, and I just felt like, wow, one, like, I can't believe that I am this privileged, right? That I get to like baby the stories and encourage my students to keep writing, and that I get to read the stuff before anybody else.
That's so beautiful.
That was definitely a moment of queer joy for me that is relatively recent. I'm gonna be
That's like our
teaching
dream too. That's why we're doing this. That sounds incredible.
I'm teaching a class in the fall, and I don't know how this one's gonna turn out. I don't know what kind of students are gonna sign up for it. Um, but I'm hoping that it'll be a positive experience also. Um, the last time I was also teaching in the spring, so the class ended on like the beginning of Pride. So there was just like a lot of just like, I see you, I hear you, I love your work. Sort of acknowledgement in that group that I really appreciated. Another bit of queer joy that is probably more like back in my days when I was young. Um, of like millions of people, I'm sure. I've been listening to Chaparral, and
Yes.
there has been something about the Pink Pony Club song that is, for better or for worse, one makes me feel ancient, but at
You
the
are
second
not.
time, it reminds me of being in my 20s, and in spite all the shame, in spite all the weight, in spite all the like family hurtful things, in spite of all the hurt and all the hate, um, that just, decided to like put on a wig and put on makeup and go to gay clubs and go and try to find a place where I could be myself. um, and it is scandalous and it is over the top, but it's also like for years queer people have cultivated these places where we are protected. We have cultivated these places where we can be safe, and again, for better or for worse, because back in those days gay clubs were covered in porn from corner to corner. I feel like before gay marriage was legal, like a lot of gay clubs were dirtier than they are now to keep straight people out. Um,
Hmm.
but there was just something about, I think, that song just like strikes me as some of my favorite prides, like Pride in British Columbia in 2012, or Pride in Portland in 2006. They're just like these moments of one being young and being just like, um. So yeah, that's some trans joy.
This sounds amazing. If you were going to gay clubs in like 2006, I would not have been allowed in there, and I'm both sad but also glad that I did not see porn clubs.
Yeah.
Are you okay? I don't know if we'll even include this in the final episode, but are you okay with me sharing my memory of the night we met?
Sure, absolutely.
So it was September 2012, and I went to this book talk at the university that we both went to for undergrad, but at different times. And I ran into the brother of one of my coworkers at a cafe. And with this friend of mine was just a beautiful tall person who was not yet Ari and I was not yet Ben. And we ended up sitting together. And then afterwards, we went to like the local college bar and sat together and got drinks. And I was just like, "Oh, what's your story?" And Ari was telling me about their Hello Kitty tattoo and how they like to cross dress. And I was just like, "Oh, cool." And like, that's basically how I remember our first meeting. And look how far we've both come.
It's love at first trans.
Yeah.
Can I chime in as to some of my recollections?
I would love to hear it.
I'm dying.
So, so Joey is a good friend of ours. I've known Joey since my first creative writing class that I ever took. We're both writers, and just Joey's a babe and a scholar.
I
He's
love
just a
him.
wonderful person. we were going to see. I went. It was Full for the Book, which is this
Yep.
big book festival that we have at a university we went to. I keep trying to say specifics, but I don't know if that's good or bad.
I mean, I don't care because you didn't go to our university, like,
No.
so I don't think it would
Yeah,
matter to
yeah.
you if we
So,
shared it.
so in,
Yeah.
in, in Northern Virginia, George Mason, has this big book festival every year, and I think it was Neil Gaiman we
It
went to
was
see.
September 29th, 2012, Neil Gaiman.
Yes,
That's the day
and
we met.
I had seen a couple of other events already, and my friend Joey said, "You have to meet my friend Fred." And I
Yep,
think
back
that
then.
Joey knew that I was somewhere like gender nonconforming, whether 2012. So I can contextualize that year a little bit more. But it was the last time that I went back to Virginia after moving to the West Coast, and it was definitely a vibe, from the person that I used to be that used to hide who they were versus, going back to Virginia and I'm wearing like a Wonder Woman t-shirt and I have like a manicure and like my eyebrows are like fleek and
They were.
the people were definitely jerks. And then I was very quickly sort of like realizing that is why I decided to leave Virginia. And so Fred, as it turns out, was a very interesting person.
I hope I wasn't a
And
jerk because I was a very
we
different person back then.
we were also drinking.
So
And so
yes.
that created some interesting tension. I remember we were talking about transgender rights, but you may not remember that specifically
No, I don't because I
because
didn't know anything.
I had a friend that I said, like she's a trans woman, but she hasn't had bottom surgery. And you said something like, so she still has a dick? So
Well,
cool.
that's I'm also disgusting.
Benjamin.
No, no, no. I mean, again, I'm not trying to corner you or try to bushwhack you
I didn't
into
know
anything
anything back then.
bad.
I didn't even know I
Yeah.
was
But
trans.
you were just like, that is cool. That is so cool that you can be a woman and have a dick. And
See, I'm not that bad.
in that context of there were also some other people that were there, and the conversation about gender mostly just become with like gender expectations and gender roles. And I think it was very easy to see that all of us at some point had been harmed, whether it was through expectations of what we should look like, expectations of what we should eat, expectations of all kinds of things. Um, and I don't want to say that like my trans radar went up, but there
You
was
can say it.
definitely a moment of just like back
Hmm.
then. I don't think we had the terminology to say egg,
Oh,
right?
everyone else saw it except me and my parents.
Like, but that's sort of just like ooh, egg, like definitely like um like you obviously have issues with gender, right? Like and you
Well, and
found
I'm not going to say what my old name was, but Fred was not part of my old name. That was just what I went by. Like
no, yeah, that was again what I'm saying is you
yeah.
had casually resolved some of the gender conflict by having a nickname that gave you some leeway. You had already addressed some of those things by like moving on from some of those expectations in the same way that I had. It's like, look, I get my nails done, I go to the nail salon, I get my eyebrows done, I wear girl shirts, I wear girl jeans. I'm not someone like I don't care, and if people are gonna passing car is gonna go scream faggot, and it's like all right, and enjoy the bad mileage on your truck. I don't know. So that sort of meeting had a lot of those things. Like there was some overt conversations. I think the timing also 2012 was a very radical year for me, if I can share some of the context around what was happening that year. Um, I had just ended the only long term relationship that I had up until that time with a person who dumped me because I wanted to go on hormones. So even though I may have not shared with you that day, I was literally starting hormones right around the time that I went back to Virginia. So that is the beginning of my hormone replacement timeline.
Yeah. I knew that you had
Um,
just gotten out of a relationship, but you did not tell me about the hormones. Though I don't know how I would have reacted. I do want to say,
I
like, I don't
also
want you to
didn't
edit out.
volunteer that.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't want you to edit out what Ari said about what I said back then because I do think it's important to show that people can learn and grow.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
I am mortified that I said that.
um, and then there was more than that. There was also the curiosity of trying to learn more. 2012 was
Hmm.
also a year that I decided to engage with the trans community and try to find my place in it, at least here in Portland. In 2012 was a year that I went to something called Gender Odyssey, which is a yearly conference that includes both like therapists, physicians, just community members, advocates. And when you walk a convention center and there is 3,000 trans people and 20 cis people who are just like the valets, it's an incredible experience because rarely do we as trans people ever get to be out in society and outnumber the cis. And
Hmm.
so just going to Gender Odyssey and going to several different what would you call them? It's a convention, it's a conference, and then you go to
Workshop?
panels
Panel.
and
Hmm.
panel discussions and workshops too. And one of the panels was a non-binary transition, and the person doing the panel was a person that had multiple different identities. So this person was Mexican, was Jewish. They were also like a redhead, so they were a ginger. So they sort of betrayed a lot of expectations of what you expect from someone who's Mexican, someone who's Jewish, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they said something that shocked me and upset me. They said that we have had non-binary transition guidelines for years. It's just that doctors don't know it. And all the doctors that I had seen up until time, they were like, "Yeah, boy, you're a girl. You have to choose. You
Hmm.
choose, you choose, and then you choose your target gender, and then you move into your target gender." Um, and so having this conversation with someone who was bilingual, bicultural, and understood this idea that non-binary transition was a thing, and it had been a thing for a while. I was not the first prospector digging in that cave, that someone had done that. Um, the other thing that I've learned in that conference was the incredible overlap of autism and queerness.
Yes, that's something I only
Yeah.
learned about in the last 2 or 3 years. But like autistic or just generally neurodivergent trans people, we are strong. We are mighty.
I learned about that a long time before I learned about that.
And um, another thing that I learned that I thought was more weird because, like you, I also had different judgments and different ideas about things, was that a lot of furries were queer. And I remember being like, neurodivergent people, yeah, furries, ooh,
Yeah, I
that's
used to
that.
have a lot of feelings about furries, but I'm much more open now.
And over time, of course, like feelings about furries have changed, but at the time, I remember like you know and there was also just meeting lots of trans people, meeting like an 80-year-old trans dude, meeting trans elders, meeting trans children, what it's like to see 7-year-old transgender girls running around with their parents and having that life that I couldn't have. Um, all of it just crystallized the idea that a life existed, but I didn't know what it looked like. But the life I wanted was not some mythology or some fantasy joke. Um, it was very real.
um, I really want to go to Gender Odyssey now. That sounds so cool.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Is that a Portland specific thing or is that something that
No, it's a
travels?
conference that I think goes to different places. I think it's been in LA, in Seattle.
So definitely
For
more
whatever reason, I want
inclusive
to say
places.
I want to say Miami, Florida, but at the same time, I'm thinking that's
Wild.
not a right place for that.
Yeah, that sounds
It might have been
wild.
just a West Coast thing. It might have been a Seattle thing.
That sounds really
And
cool.
then from that, This is actually one of my favorite stories of queer joy, so I'll share it. I was already in Seattle and I was making friends, I moved to the West Coast in 2010, and so I didn't really know a lot of people. I mostly hung out with my partner who I just ended things with. And I was just going around looking to meet people so I can make new friends. And so I was in Seattle and I went to Gender Odyssey and I was like, I don't know what to do. I guess, I have my passport. I guess I could just go to Canada. It's
Mhm.
last minute. There is no plan. I didn't even like consider it beforehand. But at the time I had no pets. I had an empty apartment waiting for me in Portland. Um, Fuck it. I'm just going to take out the credit card, reserve a hotel, and go to see what Canada is all about. It's just 3 hours from Seattle. You are in British Columbia, in Vancouver, and it was August. It was something like that. So to my surprise, that's when Vancouver has Pride. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
rolled into Vancouver after driving from Seattle entirely on impulse, and there were banners anywhere, and there were gay people everywhere. And sometimes, serendipity works in your favor.
Yeah.
And I
It's the
ended up in this,
secret queer telepathic connection that we all have.
and then not only had I had this life altering experience, a gender odyssey of meeting and talking intellectually, medically, philosophically about transness. Um, but now I can go to Pride and be a slut. And I had, up until before that moment, I was very much terrified of sexuality, and I was not someone who expressed sexuality openly. Um, in fact, I'll share this, even though the context of it we may not be able to cover in its entirety. Um, for most of my young life, like whenever I had sex, I had to be drunk. I had to medicate
Mhm.
myself one way or another for a variety of trauma reasons. Um, and that pride in Vancouver was the first time that I had sex sober. Um, and it was once like, learning that I don't have to self-medicate to participate in my own desires. I don't have to intoxicate myself to participate in my own needs, in my own wants, that all it takes is me to consent to my own self and my own body. But I was for many years not ready to do that. And so it was sort of like multi-step things that happened that year that sort of consolidated um my sort of like my queer identity as something that is like went from being a bunch of puzzle pieces into being this very hard cemented thing that I wasn't going to get rid of or hide anymore. Um and it really speaks to me of the idea that human beings aren't born out of giant eggshells, fully formed, wearing
Definitely
business
not.
clothes and carrying a suitcase, carrying life insurance, right?
Yeah.
The process of being human is one of self-discovery, development, um, and to a certain degree there are things that mold you and shape you, but there are also seeds of things about you that are there since you're a child that, if you kill them, you're killing a part of yourself. And if you allow them to grow, then you become your genuine self. And your genuine self is like you, but with superpowers.
Yes.
Hmm.
Speaking of childhood, are you comfortable talking about like your OG birthplace and like your journey coming to Portland overall?
So yeah, I've been writing a memoir for the last couple of years. I'm okay sharing everything. It's just I don't know if we're gonna be able to make sense of all of it because it is
Yeah.
convoluted.
Just like
So
for context of like the different cultural influences that you have.
sure. So I was born in Cochabamba, Bolivia. Bolivia is a landlocked country at the center of South America. We literally are neighbors with everybody else. There's Brazil on one side, Peru on the other side, Argentina down there, Chile down there, Paraguay, Uruguay. There's Ecuador over there. I don't know if we have a border with Venezuela. Probably not, but Colombia we definitely do. And so, I am Latin American within the Bolivian context because countries are arbitrary pieces of land that were created
Hmm.
through the process of colonization.
Absolutely.
I'm also the intersection of being someone who is what we would call criollo, which is someone who has indigenous roots, but because my parents, grandparents chose to embed themselves into the society rather than reject it, um, by the time I was born, even though both of my grandmothers spoke Quechua, my family was very much a Spanish speaking, suit wearing, professionally accomplished people. But a DNA test, I actually did the 23andMe thing, and I'm 55% indigenous. But that experience from what does it mean to be an indigenous person in a stolen land is just, we can write a whole book about that.
Yeah.
I came to the United States in a weird way. I was essentially abandoned by both of my parents. My dad, because he thought it was not for men to take care of children. My mom, because she was trying to escape a really horrible and violent partner, my father. Um, and also she was cheating on him with someone, but that's a whole
I
other
mean,
story.
not your circus, not your
Um,
monkeys. Well, kind of your circus, but that's not on you.
I um, And so the way in which I got to the United States was awkward and complicated. My dad, at some point, after being shamed by my extended family, decided that he was going to get a house, put all his children in it, and that would hire like a domestic worker, something like a maid to like cook and clean, and that we would be raised that way. My mom, who was in the United States, was waiting for her green card to come through. She had like a work permit, so she wasn't entirely undocumented. Um, but hearing that my dad was going to take custody of us,
Hmm.
decided to kidnap us and bring us to the United States.
That's
So I was
wild.
15 years old, my little sister was 10, and they just bought us plane tickets and shoved us on a plane, and we made it here.
So, do you just have the one sister?
No, I have other siblings
I
that
can't
have much more
remember how many
complex
siblings.
stories that
Yeah.
are. This is just someone who came with me at the same
Hmm.
time, so it's easy to sort of be part of the story.
Hmm.
Um, It was difficult because I didn't know who my mom was. My mom sort of went out of my life when I was 7, and from 7 to 15 years old, if you don't see your mom, you don't talk to your mom, you don't really know that person. You just
Hmm.
know that she exists. So I didn't really meet my mom until I was 15 years old.
That's wild.
And she also didn't know me, right? Other than say calling on Christmas on the phone to speak for like 5 minutes, or calling on birthdays to speak on the phone for like 5 minutes. My mother was just a voice on the phone that called on holidays. It was not someone that I even understood as a person. I had very different ideas of the United States and freedom and queerness. I already understood my queerness as a kid in Bolivia. I already engaged in a sort of gender exploration. I don't really want to call it cross dressing, even though you called it that, um, Ben.
Yeah, I feel
And
like that's how I remember it. I don't even know for sure if that's the word you use.
and I think that some of it is just that to address that directly, going back to 2012, sure, there was at one point where I was, wearing like my sister's clothes when I was like 5 or 6 or 7. But also like my sister was like this very conservative, churchy. person, and I didn't like her clothes. They were boring. I wanted more interesting clothes, more fun clothes. And I would take my allowance and I would save my allowance. And I would go into, even as a child, as like a 10-year-old, I would go into the used clothing markets in Bolivia, in Cochabamba, where I grew up, and buy outfits for myself that were femme. Um, and so when I talk about cross dressing and that word specifically, or when people say like, oh, that's women's clothing or whatever. It's like, no, these are my clothes. I chose them. I bought them. I wear them.
Absolutely.
They're
Hmm.
my clothes. Like everything is gender neutral if you're not a little bitch, you know? So
That's so true. Clothes have no gender.
Um, but there is, all that stigma that is still attached to all of that. So, when I was that age, I was pretty naive. I thought I would come to the United States. I'll tell my mom, Mom, I think I want to be a girl. And she would have been like, That's okay. In this country, you can just like, I don't know, go to this machine and this machine will do the thing. You know, I don't think I had any real understanding of trans anything other than like I suspected that I was not like other boys, essentially. Unfortunately, my family in the US was extremely religious. They were fundamentalist Christians, like against evolution, against Ten Commandments in every classroom.
Yeah.
Universities are evil where like evil exists. And my mom was also someone who I didn't know. And my mom had a very simple goal in life. She wanted to be the churchiest lady in church. And you can't be the churchiest lady in church if your 15-year-old son dresses like a girl and gives boys blowjobs. That's not how church works.
Not
That's
most
not how
churches.
church was
Yeah.
designed to work. And so, even though I wasn't sexually active, very quickly, I think within 6 months, I had to come out to my parents. And, this is like 1998. This is August of 1998. So it's been a long time. So my parents' first reaction was like exorcism. So we're just going to drag you to church so we
Mm.
can do an exercise, and then you're gonna meet with a youth pastor to have this anti-gay therapy, this sort of conversion therapy thing. And it's silly because like I was already an atheist at that age, so it's not like I was conflicted with like, oh God doesn't love me, because some people are like that, right?
Mhm.
That made it easier for me because it was easier to laugh at the conversion therapy rather than be damaged by it. But I
Oh
was
goodness.
still obviously the shaming, the lack of, affection and approval, the withholding of affection that comes from anything like that was still difficult. And, I remember the youth pastor told me that like gay people are disgusting and they're carrying all these diseases and that I would be dead before I was 20 if I was gay. And so like now I'm like
Okay.
41 years old and I'm just like, wow, there is no hate like Christian love, I'm telling you.
Hmm. And when did your youth pastor come out?
Was that?
When did your youth pastor come out? Just because a lot of conversion therapists end up coming out later.
Oh no, I have no idea.
Robin has a very, very strong religious background that involved
Yes.
overlapping with conversion therapists as well.
Um,
Yeah, we have a lot in common when it comes to that.
so I don't know. I mean, that damaged my relationship with my family forever. It also created just huge gaps and holes in my relationships with my siblings, and those affected me for years, for decades. My mom died when I was in my early 20s, so she didn't live very long. She was only in my life for 7 years, but she was definitely my biggest bully and the person who like did the most psychological damage to me. At this point, it feels like it's done with, you know? There is a combination of moving on, time passing, finding the love and support that you need from other people who aren't your relatives that allows this kind of hurt to heal, I think. And I think the most difficult thing for me was not trying to go back every couple of years to my family, hoping that they would not reject me because they would reject me every time. And at some point, I had to internalize the idea that this was a no and I had to move on. And I think that, grief is also not necessarily something that we control.
Mhm.
Whenever you're grieving over a relationship or your family members, I feel like grief needs to pass through you and it will pass through in its own time. You can, however, do things that allow grief to do more damage to you than it would otherwise.
Absolutely.
And I think for me, it's definitely been learning about how do I air out my grief? How do I make sure that it's not like Lord of the Rings, a thousand orcs attacking my little castle, right? How do I make sure that it is, yeah, it's there, but it's, slowly making its way through the drain and it smells bad and it's dirty. And some days it really makes my life difficult, but slowly, eventually, the giant gallon of poop smelling water goes down the drain and you don't ever have to deal with it again. So that's sort of like my family immigration background, I guess.
Yeah, you've been through some shit.
It's also complicated from the other end of my family, right? Because after I was kidnapped and brought to this country, my mom forced us to cut off contact with everybody on my dad's side of the family.
Wow.
So my dad didn't see or hear from me. It just overnight I just vanished. And that also did a lot of damage to him because even though he was a very imperfect dude and now that, he's old and we've reconciled and all that, I know that he was like, I hated your mom, but I've always loved my children. They're the best thing of me. Like, I'm a horrible person that's done a lot of bad things, but my kids have done incredible things. Like, and that also created other conflicts because my family in the US did not want anything to do with my dad. By the time I was out of the house and out from even my mom died when I was 22, I didn't have the courage to like reach out to my dad, who I hadn't seen for 7 years, and have this very difficult conversation. That didn't happen until I moved to Portland, um, where I was old enough to pick up the phone and call my dad and be like, "Hey, Dad, remember me? I'm your kid that got kidnapped and got taken to the United States." Yeah. Also, I dress like a girl and I have sex with men, which is a lot to unpack in Latino culture
Yeah.
with all of the machismo and all of the toxic masculinity that is still very much part of the culture, right?
How long did it take him to come around?
He had already accepted years before, but I didn't know because my family kept that from me.
Mhm.
So when I said that to my dad was like, I don't care. Like, I'm your
Wow.
dad. I'm always going to be your dad. That's never going to change. It doesn't matter. There are some things that I don't understand, right?
Mhm.
But also some of the things that social media happened. For example, I had been cut off from most of my family in Bolivia since I was a teenager. And then social media happened, Facebook arrived all over the world. First with college students in the US and then this global thing for better or for worse.
Oh,
But
yeah.
then suddenly all my aunts and uncles and my cousins in Bolivia, they were like, "Oh, I wonder if this is our long lost cousin that disappeared and got taken into the United States." And and there's pictures of me in a wig and makeup at Pride. And it's very sort of like walk that back and be like, no, I'm not gay. Just because I dress like a girl, I go to gay clubs and I hook up with guys doesn't mean that I'm gay.
I mean, it doesn't mean that
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, that was also part of some of the like questioning that was going on in 2012, which is like, am I gay? Am I trans? How much of this is trans? Where is the trans knob? Is it at 4? Is it at 7? What about
Yeah.
the gay knob? for a long, long time, and Ben, you can probably vouch for some of this. I rejected the word gay. I was like, look, I'm gender queer, I'm gender complex. I'm a person whose gender is this very complex thing. And then at some point in the mid 2000s, 2015, maybe
Yeah.
earlier, maybe around that time, I was like, fuck it, I'm gay. Yes,
Yeah,
yes. When you
2015 is the year that we saw the World Inferno Friendship Society, and very quickly you were just suddenly everything's gay.
everything is gay. Oh, yes. Can, in this case, share a little bit about your Agnes as I perceived
Eh,
it
this
during that visit to San
this is
Francisco?
your story, and if you want to tell some of mine from your perspective, I would love to hear it, but no
Sure.
pressure.
So, was it 2015?
It was 2015, November 2015. That was when I was turning 25, and I came out when I was 27.
So, I was visiting Ben in San Francisco. We were going to see a show in Oakland, and it's a band from Brooklyn, New York, that I had followed for many years. That it's kind of like a punk orchestra where there is like horns, but there's also a lot of punk energy. And I wasn't super interested, but we ended up going to the Castro.
Hmm.
And the version of Ben at the time that I knew was subject to a lot of the sort of like white privilege,
Oh yeah.
also respectability politics. And I had spent like the last 2 years working with houseless queer kids here in Portland as a volunteer doing community outreach. And so, once a week I would go to this resource center and hang out with kids who were homeless, who were queer. And so I had sort of planned to radicalize Ben a little bit during my time there. I think San Francisco had recently passed an ordinance that forbade people from like sitting on the sidewalk, which is at some point, they were just like hippies who would sell jewelry on the street or whatever. But this is, 2000 San Francisco, where you're supposed to work for Silicon Valley and suck computer dick. I don't know.
That's People do that now.
And then you took me to this sandwich place, and I was like,
Ike's.
we should sit on the floor and eat our sandwiches and break the law. And and it was so silly because it's like you're breaking this municipal order. It's whether they're gonna do arrest us, take our sandwiches away.
They were good.
But it was just like trying to get a little punk rock, a little civil disobedience out of Ben. And Ben was happy to comply, and we
Oh
sat
yeah.
down and we ate this giant sandwiches on the floor. And then this very gay man wearing nothing but a purse and a golden thong,
The golden
like,
banana hammock. It was made of sequins.
and came out, and it was both like the gayest, the most like liberated sort of like personal freedom existing in the public space. And I think we both recognize that as like there's a place where you can be the person that you are, or at least we tell ourselves that there is. But it is a place that we have made, or other people have made, and we have to continue to contribute to that.
Down at the Pink Pony Club.
After that, we went to the Castro Street and walked around through the shops and such. And
Bought my little rainbow American flag that I still have to this day.
yes, and then there are all these
Plaques.
like plaques, yes, of famous queer people in the Castro, and we got to the one for like Alan Turing, and you got teary eyed and really angry
Hmm.
about how can someone can be so brilliant, contribute so much, and still be disparaged and thrown away like garbage because he was gay.
When you started saying that, my brain was just going Alan Turing, Alan Turing, Alan Turing. I remember this so vividly.
For me, that was Ben is definitely gay at this point. Like, I think it's important to recognize that queer love is also, for me at least, has become this thing that love has to begin somewhere. And for me, it begins with loving other queer people. And that love is so big that it spills over. And now I'm able to love other things, even though they're not queer. That love is so big and so powerful. And then that love is also like this deep sense of protection, right? I can't believe they fucked over Alan Turing. He was so brilliant. Like, brilliance was not enough. That won't save you from a system that is ready to discard you because of who you are. Um, he contributed to the war effort in a way that was incredible. That is not enough. Being
Mhm.
a war hero is not enough. Being brilliant is not enough. Being one of the most intelligent human beings on the planet at that time, not good enough. You're gay. You need to be discarded.
Mhm.
And I think that we also felt that threat ourselves, right? Sometimes we feel that threat from our family. We feel that threat from our jobs. I consider myself to be pretty fucking talented and
You
good at
are.
what I do. And yet, there are many people who would not hire me, who would inherently reject me because of this. And it becomes a point of one, like queer resistance at its very core, our existence, and also realize that, like, we're part, in fact, of a very powerful group of people. Because, Alan Turing is good fucking company. Freddie
Mhm.
Mercury, that's good fucking company. Audre Lorde, that's some fucking good company. These were exceptional human beings. And yes, the violence of queerness came with that. Um, but that's also how we know that, like, there is a certain type of like queer excellence that is like, well, look at all these singers, look at all these actors. You can hate us all you want, but we're still going to dominate the world in this way because you've never had to do anything like that.
Yeah.
So I remember just from the Alan Turing moment that being like, okay, so like it's just a matter of time before Ben figures that out. And then of course,
That
how
was the
how
last
will
one to
that
know.
how will that unfold in terms of family and relationships? Because that's just another, Jack in a box. Dun, 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 goes the weasel, and the weasel, the gay weasel comes out, and it's hard to anticipate how people will react. Another thing that I remember from that encounter was, and this I will embarrass you on this one. I
I
have
love
to.
when you embarrass me. It's your
You
job
were
is one of the
driving
loves of my life.
you were driving me all over San Francisco like a loving and caring host, and I was playing music of that band that we were going to go see because I don't think you were very familiar with them.
Nope.
And they have a live album where the singer likes to like say some pretty outrageous things in between songs. And one of the songs starts with him going, I shot President Reagan, and if I could, I would do it again and again and again and again.
Oh my god, that was back when I was still indoctrinated a little bit.
And then you started giving this like conservative Wikipedia that sort of
Trickle
like
down economics.
arti- article of like defending Ronald Reagan as a good president.
Oh, I've changed so much.
And I think that, like, I didn't want to push too hard, but it was, the facts that you had were like the economy was good, he ate jelly beans, and he somehow managed the approval of like some asshole Republicans.
Yeah, I don't
And I
know why I thought I knew about politics back then because I knew nothing.
and there is that sort of like, this is an asshole that let the AIDS crisis happen because he found gay people to be ick, and he would rather millions of people die than fucking lift a finger.
And even when it affected one of his best friends, He didn't do shit.
And he's, a giant piece of shit, and the worst fucking person that's ever existed. And we can celebrate every day that he's dead and that his grave is now a gender neutral bathroom.
And I
And
promise our listeners and Ari and Robin, I have learned a lot and I have changed.
um to shift from Reagan just a little bit.
Thank God.
I've
It's what we've been trying to do for decades.
um but there was also just like that is the egg that is Ben. And when you are in a both place of comfort, you're also my friend. And I wasn't going to be like, you're a stupid person for liking jelly beans and Ronald Reagan. Because out of all the things to like memorize about that man, like the fact that he ate jelly beans is obviously a fact that exists to erase the actual history, right? Because I don't know what George W. Bush's favorite candy is, or
Pretzels.
It's not candy, you silly goose.
It is for him.
um, but yeah. And then I also just like remembered how like this is gonna make me sound a little shitty, but I'll go there. How very white your family is
There,
in
look at
in
me.
its in I mean that to like I have like friends that were living in Oakland at the time, including a friend who used to teach at the expel school where all the kids who get expelled from school go to. And your brother-in-law was like, Oakland is one of the most dangerous cities. It's full of dangerous people. I never go there. And I was just like, spoken like a racist white person who doesn't know they're a racist white person. But that's okay. We'll go to Oakland for one night, and no one will murder us.
And look at us, we're alive.
Fully
um,
unmurdered.
but it's similar to the way sometimes white people will talk about Baltimore on the East Coast. Um, it's like there's lots of black people there, and that scares me. But they won't say it that way, right? They have to say
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
dangerous, it's urban, there is shootings, blah blah blah.
Yeah, but everyone
Um,
knows urban means I'm a racist and there's black people there.
pretty much. Um,
Yeah.
but I also remember the show, like being a punk show. There was somewhat of a lazy mosh pit because there is, and there were all these unwashed hippies who they were very rank, even for California. And I was having to like protect Ben to be like, don't bump into my friend. Your dreads smell disgusting. Please, white person with dreads, go away.
I'm also just not a mosh pit person, so I appreciate you for protecting me. Didn't we see Gogol Bordello in the audience?
No,
Who
no,
did we
we
see in
did
the
not.
audience? There was someone in
Um,
the audience who was like a big member of a band. I don't know
Jello
why.
Biafra.
That's it. It's another name that it's like some kind of name that has a lot of syllables that is from a band I don't recognize.
So, yeah, obviously that is like a fake stage name. I think his real name is Eric or something like that. But Jello Biafra was the singer of the Dead Kennedys,
Yeah.
right? California, Uber Alice, Uber Alice, and then singing songs about the governor being a piece of shit. Very punk
Fair.
rock, very, very 80s, I think. People are gonna come in the comments and like, that's not when the Dead Kennedys were popular. But yeah, apparently, so people just call him Jello, right? So like, that's also the other thing. It's like Jello. Um, I also like to go into shows and pretend I know people. So there was also Jack, who was unfortunately passed away a couple years ago. But I was like, Jack, and Jack just came in and gave me a hug. It was a good show.
It was fun. My first real punk show.
Um,
My only real punk show, let's be honest.
but there was definitely some like egg things going on with Ben.
There always have been. I just didn't know.
Yeah, uh, no comment.
I do want to thank you for always being such a kind and generous person and loving me and helping me make it through this wild Jack in the Box.
Oh, so Yeah, I guess we can pick a new topic.
Do you want to talk about like queerness in writing? Doesn't
I'm
Ari
still.
talk like a writer? Like
Yeah,
so
oh,
beautiful.
yes, yes, I love it though.
I'll tell you about a little bit about what I'm writing. But essentially, after writing a collection of short stories that nobody wants to publish because no one reads short stories,
I read so many
poetry
short stories.
poetry is actually a more profitable genre than short fiction. I was given the advice of writing a memoir and being like, "Your life is weird. It'll probably be an interesting and compelling book." And so I try to balance different things, and the first draft of my memoir disappeared about a year and a half ago because my house burned down, and so I had to start over. But one of the things that I'm exploring in my memoir is my relationship with my dad and how different of a human being my dad is. Not just as someone who's never lived in the United States, someone who doesn't speak English, but my dad had also a wild life. My dad was this like overachiever kid who always dreamed of being like powerful,
Hmm.
you know. My dad graduated in Bolivia from high school when he was 15 years old. He was done with college by the time he was 20. By the time he was 21, he was practicing law. And
Damn.
then at age 30, he was president of the Bar Association.
Whew.
So he was just this like machine, overachieving machine. And he was also heavily compartmentalized. I've had a lot of conversations with my dad, just trying to get to know him because I didn't really get to know my mother. And as an adult, to sort of like, Dad, tell me your life story. And it's incredible some of the things that my dad was doing, um, including some pretty awful things in Bolivia before I was born in 1980. There was a military coup that was like incredibly violent, and it was the most violent dictatorship Bolivia had ever had in terms of people disappearing or being killed. This is something that I discovered through like a newspaper article. At some point when Garcia Mesa, this new dictator, had taken over Bolivia, he went city to city to sort of meet with political figures to try to sort of coalesce his influence on his government, his cabinet. And in Cochabamba, where we're from, he ended up meeting with my dad and a bunch of other lawyers. And it was my dad who introduced him to like the Chamber of Commerce of Cochabamba. So there's like this picture of my dad holding a microphone introducing Bolivia's bloodiest dictator to like a bunch of rich people so they
Wow.
can, enact their right-wing policies that benefit business and destroy the lives of poor people. And I was just like really taken with just like the historic slap in the face of how this like very crucial moment of Bolivian history, and my dad's right in the middle of it. And how is it that someone I feel like I'm not as radical as I used to be as I've gotten older, but very different thought patterns than my dad. My dad's political career was essentially undone by his own drinking, his alcoholism. And there were just like, he has a lot of family trauma with his own dad and with my mom, you know. This other thing happened to my dad that really shook him, and that is that in Bolivia at the time, it was not uncommon for men to have all the power in a relationship. And so my dad made money. He was a judge and a law professor, and my mom was just like a stay-home mom who didn't even have a high school education. So when the divorce came and all those things came, my mom had no power, zero power. So, in a way, when my mom decided to kidnap us and bring us to the United States, she was doing something that was giving her power, but she was also doing something that not only did my dad not know, but it was also something that he couldn't fix. That
Hmm.
one day his children just vanished and he would not see them again, not for many years. And it destroyed my father. Like he immediately like drank too much and stopped caring about work, and he had to essentially give up his job as a judge because he was no longer fit for it. And my dad had this like fuck it moment where he decided to move to this frontier town between Bolivia and Brazil and run a smuggling ring, a criminal operation. And my dad became a crime lord. And
Holy
he lived in
shit.
this big house with three very young women. Because he's like,
Whoa.
fuck that. I'm just going to get three hot 17-year-olds who are poor, and I'm going to charm them with money. And I'm going to have all the sex that I want. And I'm going to do all the drugs that I want and drink as much as I want, and I'm
That's
gonna make
wild.
money by bribing the police, by hiring sicarios and having like people who show up at your house with guns and threaten to kill you if you disagree. And it's really weird because I didn't, reconcile and see my dad again just a couple of years ago. So by the time we reconciled, he was already an old man. But at some point when he was in his 50s, like my dad became like a crime lord, which is weird. Of
Yeah, I don't
the
think I even knew that.
of all the sort of like paths you can have through life, and at one point it's sort of like run its course. I asked my dad if he had ever killed someone during one of our conversations, and he said that he came close to once and that he regretted it, and that is in fact one of the reasons he had to quit being, cartel like person. And there was some disagreement with someone who owed him money. And this man was essentially, grabbed by people who have guns, brought to the house, and my dad started beating him. And at some point, he got so like into it, so lost in the act of beating another person that he ripped this leg off a coffee table and started beating the man with the leg of the coffee table. And in the middle of that, or at least this is how my dad told the story, he realized that he wasn't a murderer and he wasn't gonna kill this person. But also, you can't just like kidnap someone from their home and beat the living shit out of them. The best way to do crime is to just bribe the police, bribe law enforcement, and get away with it. The
Hmm.
moment that there are bodies, it's harder for the police to look the other way. It's harder for everyone to. And you also make enemies of people who are just as likely to settle things with violence rather than anything else. So my dad got tired of being a crime lord and moved back to Cochabamba, where he started wearing suits again and became a law professor again. And it's almost like I think the fantasy of something like Walter White in that show,
Breaking Bad.
yeah, which is which is which is an American fantasy that is kind of silly. But I also think about how just a regular person can experience loss or powerlessness in a way that fucks them up completely.
Yeah, therapy's a
And
lot better than doing that, I think.
In my experience.
Holy
I,
shit.
oh, so the way I'm trying to approach this in writing is reconciling the sort of like, on the one hand, I think about the beginnings of my queer identity and how deeply I wanted to be a queer intellectual. And some of it was internalized misogyny, and some of it was just like queer phobia, all internalized in the sense that, I would be like, well, my gender is this and blah, blah, blah. My gender is this and this other thing. And obviously, I've read Judith Butler and blah, blah, blah. And yes, gender constructs and blah, blah, blah. And yes, grammatical gender and blah, blah, blah. And I also had to be honest with myself as I was exploring all of this writing that I used to do. I used to have a blog that I used to call it Gender Insurgency in Portland, Oregon. It's called Chicken Dragon with a silly name.
I remember
Chicken
Chicken
Dragon.
Dragon.
This was a Chicken Dragon production. Um, because I was still exploring who I was and trying to understand it. And I also saw this sort of resistance against this mass conformity of gender. And so it's called gender insurgency. And I realized that I had cloaked myself in this sort of academic blanket because I was ashamed of really allowing anyone to see what was underneath, you know? And I think now, especially in terms of queer joy, about what it was like to be like 22 years old. And no, I had not read Judith Butler. I didn't have a college degree. I didn't understand what queer theory was. I probably didn't even know what queer theory was a thing. I didn't have the language or the vocabulary, the education, the point of view. I hadn't developed as a person. I was probably like conservative on some points of view that I right now would never believe that I held those points of view, but I did.
Mood.
And deep down, what I wanted to do was I wanted to wear high heels and short skirts and go somewhere and be a slut. And I didn't really understand any of that, right? I just like, at some point, I would like to wear a cute, outrageous outfit and go and flirt with people regardless of who they are, what they are. I don't care. I want this. And none of that is intellectual. None of that is um academic in nature. But out of that very base impulse, right? My life has flourished out of just allowing myself to say, go do that thing. Do the thing. You learn in the process of being you who you are. And it's something that right now, especially in the trans community, we are still experiencing is that we don't want to have conversations about the basic things. Everything is so highly intellectualized, and the people who disagree are ignorant or they haven't read the proper books. And the reality is, most of us didn't read those books when we came out either.
Hmm.
Most of us didn't. When I was 12 years old and I was thinking about what do my legs look like in a mini skirt, I wasn't just like, oh, Judith Butler and gender constructs, like none of that. And so those are totally disparate things, right? You have my dad, you have hypermasculinity, you have machismo, you have this sort of, there are many men who wish they had the life that my dad had. There are many men who wish they had power, money, and young women at their disposal. And for me, it makes me think in the context of as someone who was Bolivian, who was born in Bolivia, all the things that I could have been, right? Bolivia is the third largest producer of cocaine. Like, if I wanted to be a drug trafficker, like if that was a goal of mine, I could have done that, right? If I wanted to be this or that or this other thing, I could have done it. And yet, the thing that I was the most painful for my family for some reason. Even though I don't think that the person that I am has caused nowhere near as much harm as any of all these other things, right? I could have been a gang member. I could have been, I don't know, a serial killer. And
Yeah.
I think that my mom would have been better with that than the person that I actually am. Obviously, I haven't been able to marry all these disparate things. I think a lot of my life in fragments because there are so many fragmented things, right? When you're kidnapped and put in a different place, when you leave a place behind for another and you build your life somewhere else without the people that were from there, it's not a neat life. So you cannot write a neat story. You cannot just say, and we went from point A to point B, and then we went around the merry-go-round and we ended at point C. Instead, it's sort of a very jagged, you know, disconnected collection of things that somehow go together,
Yeah.
but at the same time, they kind of don't.
I think your life is really cool. Like,
Yeah.
you are a cat parent, you are a professor, you are a community organizer, you help people get funding for things that they're passionate about, you are a freaking phenomenal home cook slash chef. You got a lot of cool shit going on, and if your mom wouldn't have been cool with that, that's her problem. And she's dead anyway.
Yeah, and then she's dead anyway. I think it's also important to always give yourself that room to grow. To go back to the topic of queer joy, some of the things that bring me joy now that I'm older, I'm disabled. Like I have a bad knee. I walk with a cane. Like the days of wearing platforms and high heels are definitely over for me. As being like an older person that's been in my body a long time, that stack of folded towels on my way to the bathroom when I need to take a shower, that brings me joy.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like they're there, they're perfectly folded, they're clean, and I can just like grab one and then I'll toss it somewhere when it's done, and it's a simple form of like domestic life, but that brings me joy. Drinking bubbly water brings me joy.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's from like the stupid soda stream machine, but it's still. I've been thinking a lot now that I'm older and have a disability about Audre Lorde and this idea of self-care. We have because we're a capitalist country and we are materialistic people. And I, as an American, having lived here most of my life, identify with that. I have to because it's the truth. We're not just materialistic, but we're just subject to a consumer culture. And when we talk about self care, sometimes self care means purchasing shit you don't need. Sometimes self care is like buying chocolate or some other thing, a form of consumption. And when you read Audre Lorde, and when we're talking about being like a black lesbian who has cancer,
Mm-hmm.
right? And she's writing poetry and she's faced with these problems of someone has to fight for my rights, my civil rights, because I'm not sure that the civil rights movement at large is actually going to defend my rights as a lesbian. I think I might get left out. Someone has to fight for my freedom as a queer person so I can experience love and affection without violence, without risk and danger. So I can experience safety in both like love and affection. Um, Someone has to advocate for change in the world, and someone has to promote the idea that the world could be better. And it's just me. I'm old and tired, and I have cancer. And she comes to this revolutionary conclusion that as a person who is chronically ill, self-preservation is an act of defiance against oppression,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
that your primary obligation is to keep yourself alive another day so you can raise your middle finger to the man, that every day that you take your meds, that you take your vitamins, and that you manage to gain access to another 24 hours of life, you're very much telling this society full of systems meant to destroy you to fuck off. And that is so much more powerful than saying self care is buying bonbons, self care is buying bath bombs, self care is buying perfume that is expensive, not some sort of like consumerism, but the recognition that caring for yourself, for me, that takes the shape of I'm going to cook for myself a very nice meal and I'm going to sit down to eat and I'm going to set my plate in this very pretty way, like it's in a restaurant. And I'm just cooking for me because the only person that's going to take care of me is me. And in doing so, I am in fact sending a big fuck you to all the systems that oppress us. And by staying around longer, we get to be older, which perhaps doesn't include as much glamour. It doesn't involve as much clubbing. But, I like us older, right? I like us older. It
Hmm.
means we're still here.
And that home with a pile of clean folded towels is not a given for us. It never has been. So to be
Um,
able to have that little thing is incredible.
you know,
Yeah.
so before we end this, I guess I don't want to be the one leading, but I guess we can end on politics.
I mean, I don't know if I'm smart enough.
We're established as all political experts. So
Yeah. Me and my jelly beans
yeah,
from 2015.
yeah. Let's get into it though. No, I definitely like to talk about politics much more than I like understand what I'm saying. That's
I definitely have strong opinions. It's just whether or not they make sense to other people.
yeah.
So I think all politics sort of begin from a brute place. Almost everything is about dividing somewhere where you can make your people and try to make them the larger group so you can win the democracy popularity contest of who has more friends who show up at this place once a year to do the thing. And because democracy is a popularity contest, it is very brutish, even though there is a lot of intellectual jerk off that happens around the word democracy. I'm thinking right now of the United States as this place where hypocrisy has been normalized to the point that there's no longer any reason to bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
You have a political party, the GOP specifically, who had people who, like Ronald Reagan, actually said, democracy is worth dying for. You had people like George W. Bush who said, democracy makes government legitimate. And now these people are, in a very obtuse way, saying, like, we're not a democracy, we are a republic. And a, a republic is just a kind of democracy. So it's almost like saying, like, this is not a car, this is a sedan. And it's like, well, yeah, but a sedan is also a car. And I think of this like really brute way in which we no longer have any meaningful political discourse. And instead, we just have memes. And the memes is like this: Democrat, democracy, bad. Republican, republic, good. And that is one messaging we're getting,
Mm-hmm.
and it is so profoundly stupid and is contradictory of the history, and yet it is so strong that you hear it everywhere. On the other hand, you have an entirely incoherent democratic apparatus that does not know how to put its policy forward, that you're essentially voting for a mechanical donkey that doesn't work 90% of the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you go to the arcade and the things will take your coin, but it won't actually give you the prize. It's frustrating to be a citizen of a country in such dire situation.
It's also scary. It's frustrating and it's terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, I sort of, we have a way of, what is the word that I want to use? We have a way of embellishing history, of granting a whiff of grandness or greatness to the most stupid of moments in our lives. And I stopped thinking of elections as historical moments in history and more as just moments in which we take, a thermometer and we shove it in the country's ass and we take its temperature.
Yep.
And an election isn't this like incredible collection of beautiful people coming together to do something intentional. It is mostly we're going to shove this thing in here and it's going to come out a certain temperature. And then we're going to have to live with that for the duration of the fever,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
right?
That's really an
Um,
illusion that's been broken in the past few years too.
And that right now we don't know what the temperature will be.
Yeah.
And it
And it
scares
seems
me.
that the supposed machine that is supposed to drive that has never really been in charge, and it's always been a coin toss. I think of the last 12 years of my life as a queer and trans person, the last 15 years. I remember that at some point in 2007 or so, I used to have an alarm on my Google News as a news aggregator has developed quite a bit in the last 15 years. Right, Google has grown and changed a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But I used to have an alarm that would show up whenever the word transgender or transsexual would show up in a news article, and it would just immediately go to my feed and be like, hey, this stories have been selected for you because of this filter you created. And back in 2008 and 2009, maybe there were like 3 or 4 stories a week. And that means aggregate on all of these online publications. Since then, transgender has become the most saturated word in media. It's not something that the trans lobby, if it even exists, it's not something that was planned by us. It
Hmm.
was a decided move from conservatives who lost the arguments on gay marriage that they would then make this the next wedge issue because it really polarized people. There's been nothing worse for my mental health in my 30s than watching the word transgender become this thing in the news, which wasn't the case. And we existed before we became the subject matter of such news articles and such media frenzy, really.
Yeah, we've existed forever.
And in this post-truth world of like digital media where you can believe whatever you want to believe and people have alternate facts, it's impossible to set the record straight of what trans people are and what we want, which is also difficult and different than previous generations who have struggled for civil rights. There's always been a right wing that is mischaracterizing the fight for equality. There's always been a regressive movement towards the past, whether it's the people who during Reagan wanted Eisenhower back, or whether it was the people who during Obama wanted Reagan back. There has always been a group of people who, I'll be judgy, why not? Perhaps because of lack of imagination, are entirely enticed into this gateway into the past, as if the past was a place from which you can find political solutions for the problems of today. And the reality is that no, you can't. I'm sorry, but like the things that were politically relevant to the fall of the Soviet Union aren't going to fix our problems in 2024. They are simply not. Going back to Reagan isn't going to fix anything. Reagan didn't even know how to use a computer.
Yeah.
But jelly beans.
But the jelly
That man ate
bellies.
jelly beans and typed on a typewriter. That man did not know how to use a graphics calculator.
No
Like
TI
the
83s for this
the
guy.
solutions the solutions for our problems are not in the past. Instead, I think for me, as someone who has tried to organize the community, I continue to struggle to find the words that will unite people into some sort of front. But I think that we can start by saying that our political parties are trash and that they don't represent us. And we cannot instead make this some sort of partisan fight. Instead, we have to mobilize not because of party affiliation, but because it's a civic decision that we get to make as citizens of this country to get up every day and participate in this country, whether it's through our jobs, through our, extracurricular efforts, to try to make this a better place for everyone, beginning with those people who are most oppressed, most hurt, need the most help. If it was up to me, that's what it would be. We would
I agree.
identify other American siblings and say who is, brutalized, traumatized, and stigmatized. And these are the people that need help. And it will create some sort of political allegiance, not based on anything in the past, not because so and so had wooden teeth, not because so and so chopped a tree, not because some speech that was given about slavery. There won't be a historical reason why we will band together, but instead it will be because we have a vision of the future. That is, that we believe that there's a version of this country that we can live with as equals,
Hmm.
that we can
Mhm.
have equal rights, that we can have the same rights. And that picture of someone that looks towards the future, who recognizes that the past doesn't have the solutions, is being totally lost from our political landscape. Not just because the Democratic candidate is a senior citizen who barely remembers his grandchildren's names, but because that political party is also looking towards the past. Right now, they're scrambling to be like, could Obama run again?
Yeah.
And if there's ever going to be a version of this country that is not grounded in imperialism, that is not grounded in colonialism, that is not grounded in oppression, dispossession, violation of indigenous rights, that version doesn't exist yet, and it's for us to create in the future. And I think I've been thinking a lot about what's going to happen on election day, because I'm going to be teaching, and there's a good chance that, like it happened in 2016, that like people could be very disappointed with what happens in the election. And I've been thinking about what are we gonna do and how are we gonna organize to survive the next 4 years? Because I'm not optimistic
Me either.
about where
Yeah.
we're at right now at all. In fact, I think it's best for us to begin planning how we're going to resist and be proactive about it, rather than pretend that we're going to win the lottery by surprise on a certain day.
Yes.
Your thoughts?
I agree. I am also not
Yeah.
optimistic. I'm very scared. Um, and like, I don't even know. I don't think there is any good option right now. So no matter what, we're going to have to be working real hard.
Yeah. Speaking of history, here's the story of how I spent election day in 2016. So my partner and I, we decided to go vote together in the morning, and we're going to take like a cute little day trip like across the state of Virginia, because there's like so many presidents who are from Virginia. So we were like, let's go visit all the presidents' houses and make a day trip out of it. And as soon as we got out of our like very well populated blue, or at least purple politically area, and started getting out like not even that far away into the state, it was just like Trump flags as far as the eye could see all over the place. And like we had like a moment of realization there, and we did our trip anyway, and we're just slowly losing optimism throughout the day. So we went to all these presidents' houses, saw where they all kept their slaves, and just like that is very enlightening in itself. We went from very optimistic in the morning to just like really like bummed out about our country's past and future at the same time. And then we all know where it went in the end, but
Can I chime in with a random memory that you have
please.
unlocked with your story, Robin?
Yeah, please.
I was in community college many, many years ago, and for history class, I chose to write a paper on the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall.
Hmm.
And John Marshall's house is in Virginia, is in Richmond. You can go take a look at it. I think Justice Roberts had just come in, appointed by Bush, and he wanted a replica of John Marshall's robes. So, like, they were trying to digitally copy the robes. Anyway, I'm in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm visiting this super old house where this family lived. And the tour guide shares something that I actually didn't know about culture. And it's not just American culture, but in this case, American culture. And that is that so many children used to die back in the day that families would not name their children until they were like 7 or 8 years old.
Mm.
And so John Marshall had 5 children that died and a number that lived. And you would see paintings of them, and it'll be like no names for the kids. And that was American culture. And then you take today in the culture that we live in, with gender reveals and 8-year-old embryos being assigned an entire personality before they even have fingers, or maybe they do have fingers at 8 weeks. Whenever their gonads begin to take shape, we have embryos that are being assigned entire personalities in the same country where not so long ago kids didn't get a name until they were like 8 years old, because they're like, I guess you're gonna live now. You're gonna need a name.
Mm.
You're gonna need an identity of some sort. And I think that in some way, by losing that, we have lost the fact that nobody is born with an identity. You develop into a person over time. And it's unfortunate. I believe that, children should just name themselves. And if
Mhm.
they choose something stupid as they grow up, they'll choose something less stupid. If
Mhm.
like, you want to name yourself Robocop, I'm gonna
Or
be like,
Batman.
yeah, it's okay, all right. But your dad is also called Robocop, so we'll call you Junior.
Robocop shit.
Anyway, that was just when you told me the story about visiting all these president houses. It unlocked this like visitation to the
Mhm.
John Marshall house, and I don't know.
And how much of our experiences as trans people are, Ben and I have talked about this a lot of times with your personal story, but how much of our histories are like influenced by just our parents' ideas of who we were going to be, who they decided we were going to be before we even like came out of the womb.
Yeah. That's why it took me so long to figure out who I even was, is because like they told me who I was going to be and they told me what I was going to do, and there was no other option.
They built the egg.
They built a very, very strong shell. Lots of calcium in that shell.
Okay. Do we have anything else, you folks? And there are other things, but I think we can
Save
we
it for
can
season
leave
2.
other topics for season 2. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I love you so much. and
The
I,
only thing I have left to say is I really need to read some of your short stories. I'm dying, so let me know.
yeah, I'll send you
Um,
Robin's email.
You don't, yeah, I consume so many short stories, and I think I've learned so much from like reading what people have
I'll
written.
send you
So,
one that I published last summer.
hmm.
Give me a second. I'll track it down right now.
Do you have Discord?
Uh Technically yes, but I hate
Okay.
Discord. I feel like um, it's one of those things where I am also beginning to feel like old,
That's me and TikTok.
where
Yeah, I've been dragged
where
into Discord.
where I'm part of this fellowship of BIPOC writers in the US,
Hmm.
and they're always on Discord and they're having Discord events, and I every time I'm on Discord I'm upset about being on Discord. I love TikTok, but Discord is, I don't know why. Um
We're such opposites, you and me. I guess I just want to say thank you so much for being our very first guest that we've recorded with. And I love you, and you're
Yeah.
beautiful. And so is your beautiful daughter, Ramona, the gay cat cousin.
Hmm. I'm very happy
Sweet.
that I got to meet you. Ben has said a lot about you. And I love all of Ben's past friends because they helped make him who he is today. So thank you for that.
All right.
And then I guess we should do, the two of us are going to do an outro.
Hmm.
So I get to be like yo 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 bye homos, and then you do your
You
thing.
can, for sure.
I just did.
um, so thank you very much, everyone, for listening and meeting my friend and now both of our friend Ari.
Yeah.
I am Ben, I am trans, and I love Ari.
I am Robin. I am trans, and now I adore Ari.
Thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye, everyone. All right, ready?
I'm ready. Are you ready, Ari?
Whoop, 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 whoop.
I love you so much.